Welcome back to Fusty Stories. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and get ready for another story you won't forget. Let's dive back to the story. The night was thick with rain, a kind that soaked London in melancholy. Edward King's Rolls-Royce slowed near a quiet alley, his mind adrift after another empty business dinner. Through the streaked window, a flicker of movement caught his eye, a figure curled beside a dumpster. Instinct overruled reason. He stepped into the cold, umbrella forgotten, shoes sinking into puddles as he approached. There, trembling beneath layers of soaked rags, was a young woman, skin dark and glistening with rain, hair matted, face half hidden. Her breathing was shallow. Edward's voice, calm yet firm, broke the silence. "Miss, can you hear me?" The woman didn't answer, but her eyes fluttered open, wide, frightened and disbelieving. In that fleeting moment, something stirred within him, a feeling he hadn't known in years, raw compassion. Without hesitation, he removed his coat and draped it around her fragile frame. Daniel, the driver, rushed forward, stunned but obedient. "Sir, should I call an ambulance?" Edward shook his head. "No, she's coming with us." The woman tried to protest, weakly whispering, "Please, leave me." But Edward ignored the plea. As the car pulled away, the city lights blurred behind them. Inside the warmth of the vehicle, her trembling hands clutched his coat. She had no idea who this man was, nor why he cared, but for the first time in years, she felt safe. Edward, meanwhile, stared out into the rain, haunted by a thought he couldn't name, that fate had just placed something precious in his path. Amelia awoke in a bed so soft it felt unreal. Sunlight spilled through tall windows, glimmering on marble floors. The faint scent of jasmine filled the air. For a long moment, she thought she was dreaming. Then she saw the reflection in a gilded mirror, her own face, bruised by hardship, now washed and clean. Her clothes were gone, replaced by a plain robe. Panic rose in her chest. She stumbled out of bed, searching for the exit, but her legs failed her. Before she fell, a gentle hand steadied her, Mrs. Hughes, Edward's elderly housekeeper, whose warmth instantly calmed her. "You're safe here, dear," she said softly. "Mr. King found you and brought you home. Rest now. No one will harm you." But safety was a foreign language to Amelia. She turned away, whispering, "Why would a man like him help someone like me?" Downstairs, Edward stood by the window of his massive study, lost in thought. His mansion had always been quiet, an echo chamber of wealth and loneliness. For years, he'd surrounded himself with silence and glass, symbols of success that only reflected his isolation. But today, that silence felt different, alive somehow. When Mrs. Hughes entered to inform him their guest was awake, he only nodded. "Prepare something light for her," he said. His voice betrayed no emotion, but inside, something had shifted. A man who built empires now found himself preoccupied by the fragile woman sleeping under his roof. Days passed before Amelia spoke more than a few words. She spent most hours by the window, staring at the garden she couldn't yet bring herself to step into. Edward respected her space, sending meals through Mrs. Hughes and never forcing conversation. Yet he watched from a distance, fascinated by her silence. There was something about the way she held herself, broken but unbowed. One evening, when he brought her a small plate of fruit, she whispered, "You shouldn't waste kindness on me." He frowned slightly. "It's not wasted," he said simply. "Everyone deserves warmth." That night, she cried quietly for the first time in months, not out of fear, but confusion. Why was this stranger showing care she hadn't earned? Haunted memories clung to her. Once, she'd been a promising art student. Then came betrayal, debt, and the slow collapse of everything she loved. Sleeping beside the trash had been her final surrender. Yet in this house of quiet grace, something fragile began to reawaken. Meanwhile, Edward's staff whispered about the mysterious woman upstairs. He ignored their curiosity. For him, she wasn't a charity case. She was a mirror. The loneliness he'd buried beneath wealth now stared back at him through her pain. When Amelia finally stepped into the garden, the morning was bright and still. She wore one of Mrs. Hughes' old dresses, loose and simple, but the sun kissed her dark skin with dignity. Edward was trimming roses when he saw her appear at the edge of the path. Their eyes met, his calm, hers uncertain. "It's beautiful here," she murmured. "It used to be," he replied quietly, until it became too quiet. Something about his honesty disarmed her. She walked closer, touching the petals as though they might vanish. For the first time, she smiled, a small, trembling smile that reached her eyes. Edward noticed and felt a warmth he hadn't felt in years. That afternoon, they planted herbs together. It was awkward at first, her hands trembling, his instructions gentle. But soon laughter broke through. Mrs. Hughes watched from the balcony, smiling knowingly. Later, when Amelia washed her hands, she caught her reflection again. The woman in the mirror wasn't the same as before. There was color in her cheeks, life in her eyes. The mansion, once a mausoleum of luxury, was beginning to breathe again. Edward didn't say it aloud, but in her presence, the silence no longer felt lonely, it felt peaceful. The next morning, a soft bark echoed through the hall. Amelia froze, startled. A golden-brown rescue dog bounded toward her, tail wagging furiously. Edward appeared behind, holding a leash. "Her name's Nala," he said, smiling faintly. "She was left at a shelter. I thought she might like company." Amelia knelt instinctively, letting the dog sniff her hand. Nala licked her fingers, as if recognizing a shared history of abandonment. Laughter spilled from Amelia's lips, light, genuine. "She's perfect," she whispered. Edward watched her affectionately. "So are second chances," he said softly, though she didn't catch it. Nala's presence transformed the house even further. The dog followed Amelia everywhere, curling beside her at night, coaxing her into walks through the garden. Edward sometimes joined, silent but content. Each day, the distance between them narrowed, like two souls circling a memory they didn't dare name. But behind the peace, Edward wrestled with questions. Why did this woman, a stranger he'd found in the rain, stir something so profound within him? He didn't yet know the answer. He only knew he didn't want her to leave. One quiet evening, Amelia wandered into a room filled with instruments. Dust cloaked everything except a gleaming black piano. She hesitated, then pressed a single key. The sound lingered, soft and clear. Edward appeared in the doorway, surprised. "You play?" he asked. She nodded shyly. "I used to, before life happened." Without another word, he sat beside her. Their fingers brushed as she began to play a haunting melody, one that spoke of both grief and grace. Edward closed his eyes, listening. The mansion seemed to exhale, every corner filled with warmth and sound. When the final note faded, silence returned, different now, alive with connection. Edward looked at her. "You make the house feel human again." Amelia blinked back tears. "You make it feel safe." For the first time, their barriers cracked completely. What had begun as pity was transforming into something deeper, though neither dared name it. That night, as she lay in bed, Amelia whispered to Nala, "Maybe kindness isn't a dream after all." Rain returned days later, fierce and unrelenting. Amelia stood by the window, trembling at the thunder. Storms reminded her of nights she'd slept beneath cardboard, praying for morning. Edward found her there, pale and shaking. Without hesitation, he placed a blanket around her shoulders. "You're safe here," he said. She looked at him with wet eyes. "Why are you so kind to me?" His answer was quiet. "Because no one was kind to me when I needed it." She stared at him, realizing that behind his wealth was a loneliness just as deep as hers. That night, lightning illuminated the glass walls as they sat near the fire, talking for the first time about their pasts. He spoke of ambition and betrayal, of love that never lasted. She spoke of loss, of hunger, of the days she stopped believing she mattered. By the time the storm passed, they weren't strangers anymore. They were two wounded souls learning how to breathe again. Weeks later, Edward invited her to dine with him properly for the first time. The long dining hall felt intimidating at first. Crystal chandeliers, polished silverware, quiet music. Amelia hesitated at the doorway, but Edward stood and pulled out a chair for her. "Please," he said, smiling. "It's just dinner." She sat, heart racing. Conversation began slowly, awkwardly. But soon, laughter replaced silence. They spoke about small things, the garden, Nala's mischief, her love for art. Edward listened with rare softness. "You should paint again," he said. Her eyes brightened. "I don't even have brushes." The next morning, she found a full art set waiting in her room. From that day, the mansion filled with color. Canvases leaned against walls, bursting with new life. Edward often stopped to watch her paint, mesmerized. She caught him once, and instead of looking away, he simply said, "You make broken things beautiful again." Her heart ached at the words. For the first time, she wondered, was she falling in love with a man who'd found her in the trash? Love came quietly, like dawn seeping through curtains. Amelia noticed in the way Edward looked at her, not with pity, but reverence. He noticed it in the way she spoke his name, softly, like it meant safety. Yet both feared the truth. Edward worried she might feel indebted, not genuine affection. Amelia feared her past would make her unworthy of him. But life, as it often does, had its own rhythm. One evening, she brought him a painting of the night he found her in the rain. "You remember," he said softly. She smiled. "I remember everything that saved me." He stood close, heart pounding. "You saved me too, Amelia." The distance between them disappeared. For a fleeting second, the world outside didn't exist. Only two souls rediscovering hope. But as quickly as it came, the moment passed. Amelia stepped back, whispering, "I can't." And though neither knew it yet, love had already taken root, deep and irreversible. The mansion glowed with candlelight that night. Mrs. Hughes had convinced Edward to host a small charity dinner, a rare event he'd avoided for years. Amelia helped arrange flowers, wearing a simple navy gown that made her beauty quiet yet undeniable. When the guests left, music still lingered from the piano. Edward approached her slowly. "Dance with me," he said. She hesitated, laughing nervously. "I don't know how." He took her hand gently. "Then let me lead." Under the soft golden lights, they moved together, tentative at first, then fluid, natural. His hand rested lightly on her waist, hers on his shoulder. Their eyes met, and time seemed to pause. The melody carried them through something unspoken, love, gratitude, redemption. When the music ended, she looked up at him, breathless. For the first time, she didn't feel broken. She felt seen. Edward smiled faintly. "You belong here, Amelia." And for the first time, she dared to believe him. One crisp morning, while Edward was away at a board meeting, a stranger appeared at the mansion's gate, a man claiming to know Amelia. Daniel, uneasy, informed her before letting him in. The moment she saw him, her face drained of color. It was Ryan, the man who had betrayed her years ago, the one who left her homeless after stealing everything she had. His smirk was sharp. "So this is where you've been hiding, living off a rich man's pity?" His words sliced through her like glass. Amelia froze, shame and rage warring inside her. Before she could reply, Edward's voice came from behind. "Who is this?" Ryan turned casually. "A ghost from her trash?" He sneered and walked away. Edward's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. Later, Amelia found him staring out the window. "You think he was right," she whispered. Edward turned to her, his eyes steady. "No, I think he's the kind of man who breaks beauty, because he's afraid of it." She burst into tears. "I was nothing when you found me." He stepped closer, gently cupping her face. "You were everything, you just didn't see it yet." For the first time, she allowed herself to cry in his arms, realizing his compassion wasn't pity, it was love. In the days that followed, Amelia withdrew. Ryan's words lingered like poison. She avoided Edward's gaze, convinced their worlds were too far apart. Meanwhile, Edward's heart grew restless. He wanted to reach her, but feared pushing too hard would break the fragile trust they'd built. Mrs. Hughes noticed the tension and cornered him one evening in the kitchen. "Love doesn't heal behind locked doors, Mr. King," she said firmly. "Sometimes you have to remind the wounded they're not alone." That night, Edward stood outside Amelia's room, listening to faint sobs inside. He knocked gently, then entered. "Amelia," he said softly, "don't let one man's cruelty define your worth." You've come too far. She looked up, her eyes swollen. But I'll never fit into your world. He knelt before her. You already do. My world changed the day I met you. The simplicity of his words melted her defenses. They sat in silence, the air heavy but healing. Somewhere between apology and forgiveness, love found a way to breathe again. Spring arrived, and with it, color. Amelia returned to her painting with renewed energy. Each stroke on the canvas told a story of survival and rebirth. Edward often joined her, reading in silence while she worked, content just to be near her. One afternoon, she invited him to see what she'd painted. On the canvas was a portrait of them, Edward holding an umbrella over her in the rain, light breaking through the storm. He was speechless. "It's how I'll always remember you," she said softly. "The man who saw me when no one else did." He reached for her hand, trembling slightly. "And I remember you as the woman who made me believe again." There was no grand gesture, no sudden confession, just a quiet understanding between two hearts that had already chosen each other. For the first time in years, Edward laughed freely. The mansion was no longer a prison of silence, but a sanctuary of love. Even Mrs. Hughes noticed, humming as she worked. "The house feels alive again," she whispered, "just like its master." A letter arrived that week, a charity gala invitation, in Edward's name. He usually declined such events, but this time he surprised everyone. "We're going," he told Amelia. She blinked in disbelief. "We?" He smiled. "Yes, and I'd like you by my side." She hesitated, overwhelmed by the thought of stepping into a world that once scorned her. But Edward was patient. With Mrs. Hughes' help, Amelia found a gown, a flowing emerald dress that shimmered against her dark skin like sunlight through forest leaves. The night of the gala, all eyes turned as they entered. Whispers rippled across the crowd. Who is she? Where did he find her? Edward didn't care. He kept his hand on hers, steady and proud. Throughout the evening, Amelia carried herself with quiet grace, her fear replaced by calm strength. When someone sneered about her humble background, Edward replied evenly, "That's what makes her extraordinary." By the end of the night, the world saw not a rescued woman, but a queen beside her king. The next morning, tabloids erupted. Billionaire Edward King's mystery companion. Who is she? Cameras swarmed outside the mansion. Amelia panicked. "I can't do this, Edward. I don't belong in the spotlight." He reached for her, but she stepped back. "They'll twist everything. They'll call me a gold digger." Edward's expression hardened. "Let them. They don't know your story." But she was trembling. "I can't survive being broken again." Before he could stop her, she fled to the garden, hiding among the roses they'd once planted together. He found her hours later, knees to her chest, tears staining her cheeks. "I thought I'd lost my right to peace," she whispered. Edward knelt, muddying his suit. "Grace isn't earned," he said softly. "It's given, and you've given me mine." The words silenced her fears. Slowly, she reached for his hand. Then, "Don't let me go again." He smiled faintly. "Never." Above them, the evening sky turned gold, as if blessing their promise. From that day forward, they lived with quiet intention. Amelia began volunteering at a women's shelter, helping others who'd known despair. Edward, inspired by her courage, funded programs for rehabilitation and housing. They became a symbol, not of scandal, but of transformation. At night, they would sit in the garden, Nala curled between them, and talk about their past not as burdens, but as stories that led them here. "You saved me from myself," Edward said one evening. Amelia smiled softly. "No, we saved each other." The mansion was no longer cold. Laughter echoed in its halls. Mrs. Hughes often joked that even the flowers grew happier. Love, once a distant dream, had become a living, breathing reality. Yet Edward knew there was one thing left undone, one gesture to make her truly believe she belonged. One evening, Edward led Amelia into the garden where they had planted their first herbs months ago. Fairy lights twinkled in the branches. At the center stood a small table, a candle, and the painting she'd made of them in the rain. "You remembered," she whispered. He took her hand, voice trembling slightly. I remember everything. Dropping to one knee, he looked up at her with eyes full of quiet devotion. Amelia Grant, I found you in a storm, but you became my calm. Will you marry me? Tears welled in her eyes. The memory of where she'd come from flashed through her mind. The cold, the hunger, the dumpster, and now this. She nodded, voice breaking. Yes, Edward. 1,000 times yes. He slipped a simple diamond ring onto her finger. There was no crowd, no cameras, just two hearts illuminated by light and love. Nala barked once, as if sealing the moment, and somewhere in the stillness, the mansion itself seemed to sigh in relief. The weeks leading up to the wedding were quiet, but joyous. Amelia refused extravagance, insisting on simplicity and meaning. The ceremony would be held in the garden, surrounded by the flowers she'd helped nurture. Mrs. Hughes fussed endlessly, while Daniel handled every detail with brotherly devotion. Edward, meanwhile, couldn't stop smiling. For a man once defined by solitude, happiness now felt like a sunrise that would never fade. One night, Amelia sat alone, looking out at the stars. She thought of every woman still lost in the alleys, every soul still unseen. I'll never forget, she whispered. Edward approached behind her, wrapping his arms around her. You don't have to forget, he murmured. Just remember you're not there anymore. She leaned into him, knowing that healing didn't mean erasing pain. It meant transforming it into light. The morning air was crisp and sweet with jasmine. Guests gathered quietly, close friends, charity partners, and a few of Edward's family. Amelia walked down the garden path, her gown simple yet breathtaking. Sunlight danced on her dark skin, radiant and regal. Edward stood waiting beneath the arch they'd built together, eyes shining with awe. When she reached him, the world seemed to fade. You look like everything I prayed for, he whispered. She smiled. And you look like everything I stopped running from. As they exchanged vows, birds sang overhead. Edward's voice trembled. I found you when life had forgotten your name, but you reminded me of mine. Amelia's tears sparkled as she replied, You taught me that love isn't given to the perfect. It's given to the brave. When he kissed her, applause rose through the garden, gentle and warm. Mrs. Hughes wept openly, Daniel grinned, and Nala barked again, joyful, free. That evening, long after the guests had gone, Edward and Amelia sat together on the porch, watching fireflies. The garden glowed softly, the night peaceful. She rested her head on his shoulder, whispering, Do you ever think about that night? The one in the rain? He smiled. Every day. Because that night, I didn't just find you, I found myself. She turned to him, eyes shimmering. Then we were both rescued. The camera of life zoomed out, two silhouettes framed by light. The mansion behind them no longer cold stone, but a home filled with warmth. Their story wasn't about wealth or pity. It was about seeing the beauty in what the world discards. From the trash of despair had risen a love pure enough to heal everything it touched. And as the final breeze rustled through the garden, Amelia whispered one last truth to the stars. Sometimes, love finds you where you least expect it, but exactly where you need it most. That's all for today. Like, subscribe, and see you in the next episode. Stay tuned.